So, hello there, and welcome back to yet another Night of the Movies podcast. And in these podcasts, I talk all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I'm reviewing the new Sofia Coppola film, Priscilla, after getting to see it at the BFI Film Festival in London. But before I do that, I should say what's the start of every podcast I do, which is, if you are watching this podcast on YouTube, hello to my viewers, but if you prefer to listen to your podcasts, well, you're in luck, as you can listen to this podcast on Spotify at Night of Movies on that platform. And if you are already listening to this podcast on Spotify, and do that as you podcast listeners, then you can also check this podcast out visually on my YouTube channel at Night of the Movies on that platform as well. Likewise, wherever you may be watching or listening to this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the podcast, of course, and leave me some feedback on things to improve on in future podcasts, because there's always things to improve on, and feedback is, as ever, much appreciated. So, let's get into it. Priscilla. So, as I've already said, this I got to watch at the BFI Film Festival. It was the third film that I got to watch there. I saw Bike Riders and Maestro there, both on the same day, and then I got to watch this film the day after. And this film, Priscilla, has interested me for a number of reasons. First of all, it's from Sofia Coppola, and I like her as a filmmaker. I mean, I must admit, I don't really like Marie Antoinette, and I didn't really like The Beguiled, but I really love The Virgin Suicides, which is her first film. I still think that that's her best film to date. And I also really like Lost in Translation and On the Rocks, which was her latest film. And I even liked The Bling Ring, which I know some people weren't a fan of. I actually quite liked The Bling Ring. I found it really interesting, particularly as I didn't really know that story. So, yeah, I like more of her films than I dislike, and I was interested in seeing her take on Priscilla Presley's story, because it's a story that I don't really know as well. That was another reason I was interested in this film, because I don't know this story, yet last year Baz Luhrmann's Elvis film came out. The Elvis biopic came out, starring Austin Butler and Tom Hanks, and that was by far and away my favourite film of last year. I've now seen it about 6 or 7 times. I've kind of lost count, how many times I rewatched that film, and I absolutely loved it. And the thing is, though, one of the things which that film doesn't really cover, or at least not in too much detail, is the relationship between Elvis and Priscilla. I mean, it talks about it and it covers it a little bit, but not in great detail. It doesn't get into depth with that relationship. And so there was something to be desired there a little bit. Even so, I loved the Elvis biopic, which came out last year. I love it to pieces. There was something left to be desired with Priscilla's storyline. And then this film comes out this year, and in a way, it's a companion piece to that film, I think. I mean, you could watch them both next to each other, and I think it'd be a very interesting watch. I think it does quite interestingly fill in the gaps with Priscilla and Elvis, where the Elvis film last year didn't. And so the fact that Elvis came out last year got me interested in seeing this as well, if you get what I mean, because that film didn't go into Priscilla aspects of Elvis Presley's life too much, and this film is just completely focusing on Priscilla, and of course Elvis is in this film as well. And it's a film about Priscilla Presley, and I don't really know much about her. I mean, I've seen her do some interviews, and I've seen her at some of those premieres for films recently. Like I saw the premiere, I saw some cool images on Google of her, the premiere for Elvis, which came out last year, and I saw her at the world premiere for this film at the Venice Film Festival. I think that's where the premiere was. And I wanted to know her story. I wanted to hear her side of the story, and this film is produced by her. She is attached as producer, and also the film is based on a book which she wrote, or co-wrote, I'm not entirely sure, but a book which I think she wrote about her time with Elvis. So, it's from Sofia Coppola, and it's a story about Priscilla Presley. And yeah, I think it's coming at a very interesting time with Elvis only releasing last year. And the Google plot synopsis for the film for Priscilla goes as follows. When teenager Priscilla Beaulieu, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that name, so apologies if I am. When Priscilla meets Elvis Presley at a party, the man who's already a meteoric rock and roll superstar becomes someone entirely unexpected in private moments, a thrilling crush, an ally in loneliness, and a gentle best friend. And that's the Google plot synopsis for Priscilla. And this is a very interesting film, and I like it, although I also think it could have been better. I don't think it's a brilliant film, I've got to admit, and I'll get on to shortly why in this podcast. I'll get on to why a bit later, but I do find it to be a very interesting film, and it's going to be fascinating to see the way Elvis fans react to this when it is released worldwide, because I do think there will be some backlash against it. In fact, I don't even think there will be some backlash. I think there will definitely be a lot of backlash against this film. Not just some backlash, a lot of backlash. Because it really doesn't show Elvis in a positive light. I mean, there are some funny moments of Elvis in the film, yeah, sure. And there are some moments when it does show Elvis in this as this caring person around Priscilla. But more often than not, it also shows him as quite a nasty piece of work. And it shows him as quite a quite a disturbing individual. I mean, I don't know how much of this story is true, but I do want to reiterate that it is based on a book by Priscilla, by the real-life Priscilla Presley, who was married to Elvis. And some of the details in this film were really unsettling. Some of the things that happened, I was quite shook up by. It was not an easy watch. It was actually a very uncomfortable watch in the cinema. I mean, the seat I was watching it in wasn't too comfortable either, but it was more uncomfortable because of what was happening on the screen. It's a very tough film to watch, especially if you like Elvis's music. And I must admit, I'm not the world's biggest fan of Elvis. I only really became a fan of his music after I saw Baz Luhrmann's Elvis last year, after I saw the Elvis biopic last year. You know, I only really became a big fan of his music after I saw that. And so I didn't have a visceral reaction to it like an Elvis fan might. But I was watching this going, you know, I don't know, his music sits right with him now. I don't know if his music sits right with me now, should I say. I don't know if this music that I've listened to so much over the past however many months, it doesn't sit right with me quite as much anymore. And I've got an Elvis Funko Pop back there, and I'm not really sure why. I mean, you can't see it in the shot right now, but I do have an Elvis Funko Pop down there on my floor in my bedroom. And I don't know, this film makes me see him in a very different light now. And I really admired that it went head first with all that, and it didn't beat around the bush. It didn't try and tell a story that perhaps would have been more forgiving of Elvis. I do think this paints him in, and not to put it lightly, I think it paints him in a quite horrific light. And I mean, again, there are some parts of the film where he doesn't, you know, he's not portrayed as completely awful, but there are some parts of the film when he is portrayed as quite an unnerving individual to be around. And the two words that came to mind for me quite a lot whilst I was watching this film in the cinema was emotional manipulation. A lot of this film is about the fascination of Elvis. What is it like to be with somebody that's Elvis Presley? And what is it like to be with somebody who's got that fame and that just got that sort of dominance, you know? What is it like to be with somebody like him? And a lot of the film is about reality versus fantasy. You know, the reality of what it actually is to be like, to be with Elvis Presley, and then the fantasy, because there's so many scenes where you see Priscilla, who was still in high school when she started dating Elvis, can be pointed that out, and that is covered very well in the film. There is certain moments in the film when you see her in high school, And you see all these girls whispering around her, oh, she's the one who was Elvis, she's the one, oh, she's Elvis's girlfriend, and things like that. And they're all fascinated by the idea of having this romantic relationship with Elvis Presley, with the king, you know. And Priscilla is as well at the start of the film. And then as the film progresses, you see the reality of what that relationship is like. And again, I keep going back to these kind of words, you know, horrific and unsettling. It's not a nice film. And it really paints Elvis in a light that... It paints him as a bit of a monster. It paints him as a monster, and I think the performances really reinforce that. I mean, you have Kaylee Spaney, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing the name, as Priscilla. She is so good in this film. She gives off a very subtle performance. You know, she's not overacting or anything. Her performance is very subtle and very understated, and yet you feel so much empathy for her. You are put into her shoes, it feels like, through so much of the film, and she gives such a great performance as Priscilla. I mean, I must admit, I don't really know what the real Priscilla Presley is like, but in this film, I felt that her performance was very authentic. I felt that she did a better job than the one who played Priscilla in Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. I felt that this version of Priscilla was more real. I can't go into details as to why, but there were certain things she did in this film that I was really shook up by just through Kaylee Spaney's performance. And then you have Jacob Elordi, I think that's how I pronounce his name. Again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing it. Many people might know him from, Euphoria. I must admit, I watched one episode of that show and I never want to rewatch it, and I never want to go back to watch the rest of it. Euphoria wasn't for me, but he's one of the main stars of Euphoria, as far as I'm aware. And he's also in that new film, Saltburn, the new film from Emerald Fennell, opening later this year, which I'm very interested in. I saw the trailer for that when I went to go and see The Lesson. That looks like a really good film, and he looks great in it. And he is great as Elvis. I still prefer Austin Butler, but that's maybe because when Austin Butler plays Elvis in Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, it's more of a celebration. In this film, it's more showing that, again, he was not really a nice individual, and Jacob Elordi really captures the essence of Elvis. I think he gets the voice right, because I have seen Elvis speaking in interviews or whatnot. I haven't really seen any of his films, must admit, but I've seen him speaking in interviews and I've heard him sing, obviously, and I think he gets the voice right. I also think he gets the mannerisms right, and there is an Elvis look about him that the film really leans into. And yeah, again, it feels like an authentic performance to me. It's a very different performance than Austin Butler in Baz Luhrmann's Elvis last year, and I'm not saying it's as good, but it is a very different performance, and I think it's a performance which fits well in the context of this film. I think both the lead two performances are very good. I mean, really, Jake Elordi as Elvis isn't a lead performance. He's more of a supporting performance, and the film is really driven by Kaylee Spaney's performance as Priscilla. Because I've got to admit, I do have some criticisms with this film. And my criticism is, and this is a criticism that is thrown at a lot of Sofia Coppola's films, my criticism is, this is a slow film. And I found it a little too slow. I found that it dragged a bit. I mean, the film is about 1 hour and 50 minutes, and it feels longer. And here's the thing. Some of Sofia Coppola's earlier films are slow. Lost in Translation is a slow film. But the thing is, it's constantly engaging and compelling to watch, though, through the way it feels. You know, the best Sofia Coppola films, in fact, almost all of her films, they kind of feel like one 90-minute to 2-hour music video. That's what they feel like. Whenever I think about Lost in Translation, The Virgin Suicides, even The Bling Ring, and definitely On the Rocks, they feel like these 90-minute music videos, or however long they are. They feel like these extended music videos, and you don't really get that from Priscilla. You know, there's a lot of needle drops used in the film, needle drops which are used very well, one which I will get onto a bit later in this podcast. Yeah, there's a song choice which I think fits perfectly in this film. And it's not really a spoiler. I do want to talk about it a bit later in this podcast. But yeah, the point I'm making is the best Sofia Coppola films feel like music videos. And this film doesn't, because it's telling this story over so many years in someone's life. And because of that, there's a lot of time jumps, and there's a lot of jumps where it feels like it just feels a bit disjointed in parts. It doesn't have the same flow that the best Sofia Coppola films, like Lost in Translation and like On the Rocks, which came out in 2020, and not enough people watch that film, and it's great. It doesn't have the same flow as those films, and instead it feels like a video diary. It feels like someone's diary come to life, and that works in its favour, but it also doesn't, because it doesn't have that same flow, and parts of the film feel like, I want to focus more on this, and then we jump to another time period. And some of that works, some of it doesn't, and so it doesn't have that same flow that, in my opinion, the best Sofia Coppola films do. And it's also an uncomfortable watch, and I get that might be completely on purpose. In fact, I would bet money that is on purpose. The fact that Sofia Coppola and the filmmakers behind this film wanted to make this an uncomfortable watch, I completely understand why. But it also means that I will probably never rewatch this film. I am glad I saw it. It has got me thinking a lot, as the best films do. But it's not nice to watch. It's not an enjoyable viewing experience. And it made me feel really uneasy. Again, on purpose, but just for me personally, I prefer films which don't, don't make you feel uneasy and are very engaging and compelling. I didn't necessarily get that from Priscilla. I felt like an outsider watching the story take place. And again, that might be on purpose. I'm sure it is. But it also means that I didn't feel that engaged and that taken by the story. I didn't feel like I was there with these characters. I felt like I was an outsider watching this story. And although I do think this film gets under the skin of Priscilla and her relationship with Elvis, I didn't necessarily feel like I was there with them. I felt like I was watching on them, and maybe that's why I felt so uncomfortable, because it was... I felt like a bystander, and I didn't like that. The film made me feel like I was watching this happen and just letting it all happen, letting their relationship take place, even though there's some, not great things happening. I don't know if I'm explaining myself well. The point I'm making is I didn't enjoy watching this film, and it was quite a tough watch. It's not too dissimilar than Alice Darling, the Anna Kendrick starring film which came out earlier this year, which I also admired, but it's another film that I will probably never rewatch. And I will probably never rewatch this film because it was such a tough watch. And I'm not saying that because I'm an Elvis fan. I'm really not a big Elvis fan at all. But it's just a really difficult subject matter to muster, and it also gets you thinking, has this happened more? And the chances are it has. Has situations like this happened with other artists where they start a relationship with someone quite young? I mean, I've never really looked into it, but maybe that's why Priscilla wanted to get the story out there, to hear, to see if other people and to hear if other people came out about situations like this, because I don't know, it really was quite shocking, and I'm still shook up by it. The more I think about it, the more I am quite disturbed by the whole film and the events that take place. And it is a good film, and it feels very much like a Sofia Coppola film as well. It does have that. The way it looks is absolutely gorgeous. It's shot in this beautiful fashion, as every Sofia Coppola film is. And just look at it, it's a whole thing of every frame of painting. It really is in this film. There's so many moments where like, wow, this just looks incredible, and seeing it in a cinema looked even better. And the costume design is very good, and the hair and makeup, it all looks like a film that takes place in the 60s. I think it takes place in the 60s, yeah. Well, the 50s and the 60s. It looks like a film that takes place during that period. and it has some very good music choices. The film doesn't really have a musical score, at least as far as I remember. It doesn't really have a musical score. It's mostly dependent on songs from that era, songs from the 50s and the 60s, and the most memorable song used in the film, this is not a spoiler by the way, not a spoiler, but the most memorable song used in the film is at the very start when you get Baby I Love You by the Ramones, which is a great song by the way. You get that playing at the start of the film, and just the lyrics from that song perfectly encapsulate the feeling to the rest of the film. Like, baby I love you, I love only you. Just those lyrics. Yeah, the way... I'm not sure if I'm going to listen to that song the same way, because it's used at the start of this film, and it really sets up the feeling for the rest of the film. It's a hard film to watch. I really think it is. I also think it's an important film to watch. And I think that people who are interested in Priscilla Presley should watch this film. I think if you were interested in a story, I think you should watch this film. I also think it makes a very interesting companion piece to Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, which came out last year, because that film celebrates Elvis, and it's one of the reasons I loved that film. This film shows a different side to him. That film was like, oh, look how Elvis was. He was the king. This film was like, actually, Elvis is a monster. You know, it's a very different film, and I liked what it did. I liked watching it, and I wouldn't say I liked watching it actually, but I think it's a good film, and I liked it, but I would probably never rewatch it. But saying that, it's an interesting film, particularly on the subject matter of the fascination of Elvis, the fancy versus the reality of what it is like to be with him, and how unsettling this film is. Really shows you how affecting and how it works in showing Priscilla's side of the story. That's what it works in doing. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that Priscilla, I'm going to give it an 8. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. It's actually a very good film. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I didn't think of Elvis and Priscilla's story like this. Again, I'm not a big Elvis fan, as I said about 3 times in this podcast. I'm not really a big Elvis fan. But watching this had me really unsettled and has changed my perception on him. Not necessarily him as an artist, although it has changed my perception on him as an artist. And also, it's changed my perception on him as an individual. That's what I really took away from this film, and it made me feel really sympathetic and empathetic towards Priscilla and the way she's portrayed in the film. It's a film that's not going to be for everybody, and I can see some Elvis fans being completely up in arms about this. But in reality, you need to reiterate that Priscilla is a producer in this film. She was at the world premiere in Venice when this film premiered. The film is based on a book that she wrote. You need to keep these facts in mind. That the truth is, this film will probably be quite accurate. I mean, I'd be surprised if it wasn't. I mean, there's so many bits, and so many, not even just bits of detail, so many big bits of detail, which everybody already knows are facts. And I mean, yeah, this film, as you're gonna tell, it really shook me up, and it got me thinking, as the best films do. I don't think it's Sofia Coppola's best work. I still think her best work is her first film, The Virgin Suicides, which, by the way, if you haven't watched, I would definitely check out. And I do think it does feel a bit slow in part, but I also do think it's an important film to watch. And I will say, seeing this in a cinema full of people, because it was full of people, seeing it in a cinema full of people was a very interesting viewing experience, because there were certain moments in the film where people went, oh my god. Like, I heard people whispering that in the cinema, because, again, there are some shocking moments, and it's it's a very disturbing film, and it's a film about the fascination of Elvis and the reality versus the fantasy of what it is like to be with him. The fantasy versus the reality of what it is like to be with Elvis, to have his child, and to be married to him. The reality versus the fantasy of all that. And that, for me, is what made the film interesting and what made it work. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that Priscilla, I'm going to say that it's an 8.5 out of 10 for me. Anyway, guys, that's it for the podcast for today. That was the third and final film that I saw at the BFI Film Festival in London. However, I'm seeing another film that's part of it in a couple of days that I'm not seeing in London, but it's part of the BFI Film Festival. And I'll explain more about that when I do my review of the film that I'm seeing, and I'm very excited about the film I'm seeing. I'm not going to give it away, but you'll see my review coming up for it in the next couple of days. I'm very excited about talking about that in my review that's coming in the next couple of days. You know, there's a review coming and I'm very excited about it. But Priscilla was the third and final film that I got to watch at the BFI Film Festival in London, and I would definitely recommend it when it comes out in cinemas, or maybe not in cinemas actually, but I would recommend it when it comes out on streaming. I do think it is a film which a lot of people are not going to like. I think it's a film which a lot of people are not going to like. But I also think it's an important film to watch. And if you're interested in Priscilla Presley's story, I think it's definitely one to watch out for. I would recommend it. However, beware that it's not an easy film to stomach. And if you have seen Priscilla and you're watching this podcast, let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. And also, that is it for this podcast today. So, I'm going to round things off by saying thank you as always for watching or listening to this podcast. And if you haven't yet, please click down below and like, subscribe on this podcast. And look forward to many more podcasts coming very, very soon on this channel. As already said, thank you as always for watching or listening. And I will see you guys again soon. But bye for now. Bye.